Welcome to Gold Coast Insider, where we bring you business insights, stories, opportunities and forecasts from movers and shakers across the Gold Coast. I'm your host, Estella Rodighiero. I'm CEO of Regional Development Australia Gold Coast. In today's podcast, we explore the Gold Coast's emerging biomedical industry study, a collaborative effort between RDA Gold Coast and our partners, the Queensland Government's Department of State Development and Infrastructure, the City of Gold Coast, and the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct. The Gold Coast biomedical industry has experienced remarkable growth since its inception just 2 decades ago. The city has evolved into a vibrant location for biomedical innovation, startups, emerging industries, forward-thinking SMEs, and a top 10 global pharmaceutical company. This rapid growth has set the Gold Coast on a path to becoming a leader in Australia and globally in specialist fields of biomedicine. Joining us today for enlightening discussions on the latest developments in the biomedical industry on the Gold Coast are 2 distinguished guests. First off, Dr. Chris Davis. Dr. Davis obtained a PhD in synthetic medicinal chemistry and now serves as General Manager of the Institute for Glycomics, where he leads a team dedicated to the strategic and operational development of the Institute. His expertise spans domestic and international business strategy, technology, commercialisation, and overall Institute operations. Dr. Davis holds significant roles as the Deputy Chair of RDA Gold Coast and Chair of AusBiotech, Queensland. Also joining me today is Dan Barr from Better Cities Group. Dan is at the forefront of city-shaping consultancy in Australia. With nearly 2 decades of residence on the Gold Coast, Dan holds formal qualifications in urban design, public health and project management. His work with Better City Group focuses on driving economic revitalisation and creating vibrant and thriving places. Stay tuned as we delve into the insights and experiences of Chris and Dan, offering a unique perspective on the dynamic landscape of the Gold Coast biomedical industry. Chris, to start the discussion, what is biomedicine?
Yeah, thanks, Estella, and thank you very much for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be here once again on your podcast series. Look, great question to start with. What is biomedicine? So biomedicine can most simply be described as having 2 streams, pharmaceuticals and medical technologies. So under pharmaceuticals, you've got things like vaccines, drugs and nutraceuticals. And then under medical technologies, you have things like diagnostics, medical devices and new medical implants. So they're generally the 2 spaces within biomedicine where us as researchers and product developers work.
Right. Thank you. So why is it the right time to conduct this study? Why now?
If we look at biomedicine on the Gold Coast, we look back 2 decades ago and the Gold Coast did not have a biomedical industry whatsoever. And so we look at the industry today and it's completely transformed. We actually have a biomedical industry. We've moved to having no research basically in drug and vaccine space to now having drugs and vaccines in clinical trials. We have new companies, startups, SMEs popping up to service the industry and develop new products. Moreover, we have a top 10 pharmaceutical company now co-located here on the Gold Coast in the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct and in Griffith University campus. So the industry itself has moved so far in the last 2 decades.
So thanks for that, Chris. It's so if we go back a few years, the same partners who initiated this project initiated a review of the clinical trial sector on the Gold Coast. And that was the first time that we started to try to understand the capability of the biomedical sector, albeit just a small segment of it at the time. So in 2021, what we did find, which whilst people might have anecdotally known, but we were able to really document, was that the city did have significant clinical trials capability. And that it was the expectation of the sector was that it would grow quickly. And where we landed was that we felt that based on the capability at the time that the Gold Coast was the most advanced regional city in Australia for clinical trials. A few years later, late last year, the same partnership decided that it was appropriate to look at the biomedical sector in its totality. and broaden the review of it from just clinical trials. What we found, if we look back, is that the expectations of the clinical trial sector actually exceeded what people felt it would do in terms of the number of clinical trials that we were delivering as a city, and also the amount of people that it was employing. So that was really interesting from our perspective, that it had grown quicker than anyone thought it would. And then when we did that, we started to look at the biomedical sector in its whole. What we were trying to establish is, how big is it now? What are the things that we need to do over the next 10 years to make sure that we optimise its growth, and how big could it be if we did all these things to achieve that? And to do that, we spoke with over 30 organisations. We conducted workshops with representatives from the sector, and we identified the amount of jobs and through ANZIC codes, the value of those jobs to the Gold Coast, and also the construction on the Gold Coast as well. And what we found is that over the last 5 years, the biomedical sector, has grown faster than the rest of the Gold Coast economy, both in terms of contribution to the economy and also jobs. And we forecast that it will grow more than twice as fast over the next 10 years than the rest of the Gold Coast economy. So based on the project that we did 2 years ago, we're feeling quite comfortable with those forecasts and with the discussions that we had with all our stakeholders.
What are the factors that are contributing or has contributed to this remarkable growth over, let's look at the past 2 decades, because I think, Chris, you've said often that, the Institute for Glycomics started in almost just one little area, and now you've expanded so great. And that was only two decades ago. We had nothing really, potentially.
Yeah, no, that's right, Estella. I think we've really got to put it down to, first and foremost, the people, the biomedical champions who started this industry, and also the government, the universities, the community, and other individuals that have supported those biomedical research champions. And look, you brought up the case of the Institute for Glycomics, so I'll continue on that line. But Griffith University had a strategic vision back in 2000 with the current and founding director of the Institute for Glycomics, Professor Mark van Itstein, and that was to establish biomedical research here on the Gold Coast in a particular specialist field of biomedicine. And it's really, the research champion, the founding director, the university, and also the government, because it was actually in the Beattie era government, their first smart state investment into biomedical infrastructure on the Gold Coast. And they made 2 major investments, multi-million-dollar investments, into the Institute for Glycomics to establish the institute. Was the first investment. Second investment was to build new infrastructure on top of their first stage building that they had established. So over several years, the institute was established and grew, and currently holds over 200 scientists on the Gold Coast. So if it wasn't for, number one, the vision of that individual to establish biomedicine here on the Gold Coast, and think that the Gold Coast was an ideal location to establish this industry, and also the government and the university to support that person, but also the local community. The local community really gets behind the industry and have really supported the industry to help grow the industry. As I mentioned earlier, we've gone from having nothing 2 decades ago to now having drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics all in clinical trials, all invented out of the Gold Coast. So to do that in 2 short decades, I think absolutely is remarkable. So that's one aspect, I think, that's contributed to that remarkable growth.
Right.
Yeah, Estella, absolutely, Chris. I think the other point to make is that none of it's been by accident. Everything that's happened in the biomedical sector on the Gold Coast has been very deliberate, very strategic. And I'd say that there's been great patience shown by all the stakeholders looking to grow the sector over the last 20 years. And probably the best example of that is the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct, which obviously is a lot of the biomedical sector activity does occur within the Knowledge Precinct, although there's obviously a lot of other activity elsewhere as well. But the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct has taken time, but it's been highly curated to have activities within it that support innovation in the biomedical sector. So there's at different times, there's been a lot of push from different interest groups for other different types of activities to go in it. But the line's always been held that it is the Knowledge Precinct and it's to be there to support innovation. and sometimes it hasn't moved as quickly as people wanted it. But when you look back and you appreciate the big ticket items that have occurred over time, like the Institute, like the Gold Coast University Hospital, the private hospital, the Athletes Village supporting all the residential going in there with Smith Collective, and then that also contributing to the opportunity for cohort to go in. And now we're seeing all these additional buildings go in with new office space and lab space. You can really start to appreciate the patience and the deliberate efforts of the stakeholders within all three levels of government and the private sector to make this probably one of the best knowledge precincts in the country.
And I guess that leads in, and perhaps you've answered it a little bit, on how has the Gold Coast evolved into that vibrant hub for biomedical innovation, startups and emerging industries? So how has that occurred?
My view would be that the Gold Coast is it's a very young city, and it's been built on entrepreneurship from start. That's part of the character and the DNA of the city, and I think that reflects into building new companies and businesses from scratch. Again, so there's that character of the city, but there's also been this very deliberate approach to support SMEs as they grow from an idea to one person to 10, and then as they kind of push forward into 15, 20 and onwards. And we see that very deliberately through cohort and other innovation hubs in the city, where they're actively supported by the three levels of government, both in terms of place, governance, how to move business practice, to enable them to be the best organisations that they can be and continue to grow into bigger organisations going forward. So for me, again, I think it's two things. It's the nature of the city and also the very deliberate efforts of all involved.
Mm.
Yeah, I might add to that if I could, Dan and Estella. I think the passion of the people. Passion of the people and collaboration. And the reason I say that is if I look back to one of the first technologies that was invented on the Gold Coast, where we wanted to run a clinical trial on that technology, obviously our first port of call for running clinical trials was Gold Coast University Hospital, and the head of infectious diseases there, Dr. John Gerard, Chief Health Officer of Queensland, who immediately jumped at the opportunity and said, well, innovation, this is great to see this on the Gold Coast. I want to be involved in running this clinical study on this malaria vaccine technology that you've invented. Also, Jim Fink, also from the Gold Coast University Hospital, was involved in that early study, along with many other medicos who had a keen interest in clinical trials on the Gold Coast. Once again, these are technologies. These aren't technologies of other organisations. These are technologies that we've invented here on the Gold Coast, and then we're taking into clinical trials here on the Gold Coast. So that collaborative spirit with the hospital, but also now we're starting to see it with startups and with SMEs. And as Dan pointed out, particularly driven through the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge precinct activities, cohort and others, where we're starting to see a really great collaborative and entrepreneurial environment being established. We've got new companies, new young entrepreneurs who are so eager and hungry to sink their teeth into new biomedical technology and develop those. So I think it really comes, for me, once again, comes back to the passion of the people and collaboration.
It also comes back to vision. Like somebody started off with this vision, and then I think it was very collaborative, wasn't it? Like someone started with that vision. It was a purposeful vision, and then everyone got on board with that needed to get on board. So it wasn't just an ad hoc, was it?
No, that's right. I think the vision was that it be collaborative, but I think it's good to have that vision, but to actually see that being rolled out, see that in practice, it comes down to who the people on the Gold Coast are and the fact that they're all willing to roll up their sleeves and work collaboratively to build something. And I think that's something that sets us apart from other cities around Australia, is that we have this great Gold Coast Health and Knowledge precinct that we're building now, this new industry that we're building, but we've also got this great entrepreneurial spirit and collaborative spirit.
Yeah. So it also brings incredible economy to the Gold Coast, and the report has shown that the Gold Coast biomedical sector is expected to grow at twice the rate of the total economy. But more importantly, the sector directly contributes 300 million annually and a total effect of 592 million, which is expected to double over the next decade. So let's go into the economics of the biomedical industry here on the Gold Coast. Who would like to talk to that initially? Dan?
I can have a first crack. Yeah, look, I think it's a really important sector for the Gold Coast. This has been talked about before, but the GFC hit the Gold Coast really hard. It was time as a city that was growing up, moving from 500, 600, 700,000 people. It was time to diversify the economy, which has traditionally been supported and continues to be supported by a strong tourism and construction sector. But in addition to sectors like sport, film, manufacturing, biomedical has been seen as one of those things that we should continue to grow, and these things take time. But we are starting to see the fruits of these labours with an economy that's more mature, still based a lot on private sector, but certainly biomedical is growing into an important sector for the Gold Coast. I think the other part is that it's aligned with all of the policy frameworks of local, state and federal government. So we've got the roadmap, Biomed roadmap for the Queensland government. We've got the economic development strategy for the City of Gold Coast. And we've got peak bodies like MTP Connect. And there's a real alignment with this intention to grow biomedical sector to attract organisations and research champions to the city, but also to continue to grow our own capability as well. So it's really important from an economic development perspective. One of the other really important parts about having a thriving biomedical sector is that it provides the residents of the city with greater access to healthcare, ensures practitioners can provide their patients with the latest and greatest in terms of medical healthcare. And that's not just the economic drivers, but certainly for practitioners on the Gold Coast, it's really important that they've got access to the latest clinical trials or the latest inventions or interventions to be able to offer the best healthcare. So for the greater Gold Coast community, there's not just the dollars, there's also the benefit in terms of health and wellbeing as well.
I was going to ask Chris if you can add to that, and particularly around those broader goals of enhancing that healthcare through research as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the opportunity that it gives to young Gold Coasters, that career pathway, the education opportunity that you can now have on the Gold Coast because we actually have a biomedical industry. So, from secondary or right from junior to secondary schools, now into university and then onto a career on the Gold Coast, which was never actually possible going back even, 10, 15 years ago. So now, as a result of the growth of the biomedical sector on the Gold Coast, you can have all of that. You can stay here on the Gold Coast and enjoy a profession. And I think, as another broader contribution of the industry being established here, the fact that it's attracting highly skilled personnel from overseas gives us the opportunity to train highly skilled personnel here on the Gold Coast. It also gives us access to the latest technologies and products. Because we're growing a sector here, it brings our folks and attention to here. So you're going to have leading researchers, you're going to have leading clinicians who are all going to be aware of the latest biomedical and medical technologies, so they can implement that in their practice or in their research. So also to experimental technologies. So we've got new products that are already approved by the regulator that clinicians that are attracted to the Gold Coast can implement, but also experimental technologies whereby if we're running clinical trials here on the Gold Coast, it means that Gold Coasters get access to the latest technologies through clinical trials. So you think about all of these things, wrapped up as broader benefits of the biomedical industry and what they can give Gold Coasters. I think for the Gold Coast, establishing the biomedical industry is one of the greatest things that it's ever done.
Absolutely. And
Stella, could I just add to that? So I think what probably didn't touch on it is that the biomedical sector is basically high value, high knowledge jobs. Which obviously generates increased revenue for the city and for other levels of government. But the other part is that there's jobs in the sector that translate to the ability to be able to support other sectors that we want to grow. So people with skills in data and AI, access to venture capital, all of these types of jobs contribute to things like advanced manufacturing and food technology, all the other types of sectors that we'd like to grow as well. And we're trying to make sure that we attract or retain, as Chris said, the people with these skills and knowledge in the city so that we can catalyse those sectors as well.
And just another bit of statistics that came out of the project was the expected future annual employment growth of 7%, which is more than double the rate of growth that is expected for the total Gold Coast employment. So, feeding back onto those high skill jobs of the future, local jobs, local skilling, and universities picking up on those subjects to increase, the participation. And they don't have to leave the Gold Coast now in order to get these really highly skilled experiences and jobs. Chris, I'm going to ask you a question. I was wondering if you could walk us through some of the inventions that we're privy to that have happened on the Gold Coast, and some of the low-hanging fruit that we've managed to achieve here on the Gold Coast, which has put us on the stage, the global stage.
Sure. Look, I think we've done remarkably well over the past decade in inventing new technologies in the biomedical space. Just a couple of examples of those. A streptococcal A vaccine. It's currently going through a phase 1 clinical trial at the moment. That streptococcal A vaccine is a leader globally now in streptococcal A vaccine development. It's anticipated that vaccine will go into a phase 2 clinical trial in Q1 of 2025. So streptococcal A causes strep throat, which you think, well, that's not much of a big issue, but it also causes things like rheumatic heart disease, invasive strep infection, and a whole range of other diseases, around about 17 diseases in total, with a mortality of around about 650,000 deaths each year. So streptococcal A is a massive killer, and yet we don't have a vaccine available in the world. And the leading vaccine candidate around the world is ours out of the Gold Coast. So I think that's quite remarkable. We also have a drug that was invented on the Gold Coast. It's called a repurposed drug. It was a drug that was used for another purpose originally, but it's now being used for virally induced arthritis. That drug has been through a phase 2 clinical trial. That drug's licensed to an Australian listed company, Paradigm Biopharma. And so that is another example of a technology that's been invented here and now running through clinical trials. Hopefully one day that vaccine and that drug will be available on market for Gold Coasters and also people around the world to use. There's also been advances in diagnostics, so the invention of diagnostics here on the Gold Coast. There's been cancer diagnostics. One in particular has been licensed to, again, an Australian-listed biotech company, and that cancer diagnostic is gearing up now for a major clinical trial. And that's a pan-cancer diagnostic, but initially focused on ovarian and breast cancers. So a multitude of technologies that are now popping out of the research that's been done here on the Gold Coast. What's going to be interesting is to see over the next decade or so how much of the research, how much of the product development can actually remain here on the Gold Coast. At this point in time, we can do a lot on the Gold Coast, up to around about phase 1 clinical trials, developing those technologies. But beyond that, we usually have to partner, and it usually goes outside of the Gold Coast. Whereas in the next 10 years, we may see a lot of that work being done right, product development work being done right here on the Gold Coast. That's our hope.
So the study also looked at the supply chains, and it looked at the skills gap in the value chain. So what was identified in that value chain, Dan, and how is the value and relevance, how was it determined?
This is to lead off on Chris's point there, where he's talking about the process from an idea to a product coming onto the market, and the steps along the way to make that happen. And as the sector matures, it will grow in maturity in different stages, and we'll have more ability to be able to handle more of it as we go along. But we identified 4 stages. First was the early research, a concept. The next was pre and early clinical development, which is the stages 1 and 2 that Chris was talking about. The next is late clinical development, which is stage 3, and then moving into production and used by the broader community. So we identified that the early research is a real strength on the Gold Coast and also in that late clinical development in the stage 3. But as Chris highlighted, in that pre and early clinical development where we're looking at efficacy and toxicity, there's opportunity to continue to grow that. And there's also opportunity to grow the production and regulation stages as well. But we kind of felt like with the sector, if we look at other cities that have had biomedical sectors for decades, 50, 60 years and longer, like Boston and San Diego and Melbourne, these things come on in time. And if we're going to be strategic, we need to probably think about over the next 10 years, what are the things that government and private sector should try and advance? Where's the best places to put our efforts? So, and again, a lot of that will also have commercial realities as well. And it's not just going to be about government supporting it, will be about the commercial realities of being able to bring certain activities on, recognising the size of our population as well. So, yeah.
Chris, I'm going to double back to your prior conversation, and we're talking very much about those vaccines, but we're also leading in technology, aren't we? In a lot of our medical devices even are being developed here on the Gold Coast.
Yep, no, absolutely. I think devices, diagnostics, implants. These things these are things now that are being developed here on the Gold Coast, and we're seeing a lot of these technologies move into the clinic. And so, it isn't just drugs and vaccines. It really is now extending into that medical technology space. And to think that 10 years ago we didn't have really any development in that space to now where we have multiple technologies that are being developed in that space is quite remarkable. And companies popping up around that space. I guess another thing that we shouldn't overlook in the growth of biomedical and biotechnology on the Gold Coast is that nutraceutical space and probiotic space, which is starting to become really strong on the Gold Coast. There's some great companies popping up on the Gold Coast now, that are really deep in that space, that are manufacturing in that space and providing manufacturing solutions in that space. So that is another space on the Gold Coast where we're really excelling. I think that's a space to really watch over the next 5 years, because I think we will be leaders in that particular space as we start to see the companies that are already established grow. So so not just drugs and vaccines, but nutraceuticals, devices, diagnostics, implants, all of those we're actually developing.
So looking forward, what are the anticipated impacts of initiatives like the Sanofi Translational Science Hub on the Queensland biomedical sector, and how does that align with the region's long-term goal in biomedical innovation and research?
Yeah, thanks, Estella. So I might first of all describe what the Sanofi Translational Science Hub is. So it was an investment by the Queensland State Government, Sanofi themselves, University of Queensland and Griffith University to all contribute financially and also with capability to develop new vaccines here in Queensland and use Queensland capability to do that. So it's a major initiative, $280 million. And as part of that, Sanofi would base themselves on 2 sites in Queensland, one in Brisbane and one on the Gold Coast. And so we're so pleased that Sanofi is now co-located in the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct on Griffith University site. And the benefits of that are multifold. One of the major things that they'll be doing is developing one of their lead vaccine candidates that they're currently taking through development. That's a chlamydia vaccine. But behind that, they have a pipeline of vaccines that they plan to develop here on the Gold Coast. That's predominantly in the mRNA vaccine space. But in addition to developing those vaccines using Queensland and other capability from around Australia, but predominantly Queensland capability, they're also looking to Griffith University and to the University of Queensland to say, how can we partner with your technologies, with the technologies that you are developing in your universities now? And so this initiative actually gives us the opportunity to co-develop vaccines or develop vaccines alongside Sanofi and use our expertise here on the Gold Coast to do that. So what that ultimately means is that we get insights into how Sanofi do their science, develop their vaccines, and run their business. And it's that little sophistication that the Gold Coast hasn't seen before. And so having them co-located here, we get that direct access to Sanofi personnel and the Sanofi projects. The idea is that we sign up with Sanofi to formal collaborative projects, and using our expertise, we in specialist areas of biomedicine, we help with their development of the vaccine candidates, but also they look at the technologies we're developing and they work with us to help develop those technologies. And what that means is that we may need to lean on them for advice in the regulatory space. So understanding how to take a drug or a vaccine through to a phase 1 clinical trial, to a phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials is actually a laborious process, and it's quite tricky. And so the regulatory advice that Sanofi can bring is invaluable, actually. And so it's things like that Sanofi can contribute to the science and technology and research that we're doing here on the Gold Coast that we've never had before. There's a whole swag of other great benefits of that relationship. That is just one of those. But I see this initiative as being the start of many great initiatives with multinational companies here on the Gold Coast.
Brilliant. So where do you think the industry is going here on the Gold Coast? Let's just look at this. Where is industry going, and what is it going to take to get us there?
That's a really good question. And all of the outcomes of the report are prefaced on not just the status quo. They're prefaced on the idea that the private sector and government will work together to ensure that the sector's got the infrastructure that it needs, that it's got the bed space, the offices, the laboratories, the buildings, that it needs to be able to grow their activities. A lot of the organisations that we spoke to are at capacity. And to be able to continue to grow and reach their potential, there's going to have to be investment in buildings and space. As Chris pointed out, one of the other things is that to meet those targets and to reach that potential, we need to attract global superstar researchers who then also attract other researchers. But we also need to have the workforce locally to support the industry as well. I think the other thing is that a lot of there's tourism, sport, others on the Gold Coast have been really well supported by advocacy groups in the past. I think the biomedical sector has got to the point now where there is an opportunity for it to have a consolidated peak body or advocacy group or leadership that highlights the value of the industry on the Gold Coast, the capability that it has and the opportunity for the future, and that it's able to advocate both interstate to the federal government and overseas on the value and future opportunity for the Gold Coast. And we've seen that work really well with Experience Gold Coast. We've got great examples and Study Gold Coast. So I think that's another part as well. And I think we just need to continue to make sure we've got really stitched up policy settings. We're all really, all levels of government and the private sector and peak bodies are really, really aligned in terms of making sure that we get the best outcomes that we can, but we just need to always be focused on making sure that we're as aligned as we can be. So that I think we can't be complacent. We need to, and we haven't been over the last 20 years, we need to be really deliberate, and we need to be really patient, and we need to acknowledge that the community and politics sometimes is going to want quicker outcomes. But I think if we're patient, that we will continue to get the really great outcomes that we've gotten so far.
And I think this project, the project was delivered in a number of stages, wasn't it, Dan?
We looked at, first of all, from a stakeholder engagement perspective, it was really one of the really important things. I think it's important to recognise that this type of project we were unable to find an example of a project that looks at either the clinical trials or a biomedical sector at a regional level. There are similar projects that have been done at a state or a national level, and that's because the data sets exist to be able to identify the detail that we've been able to identify. We had to go and work really closely with the industry to understand the current status of their workforce and also their ambitions for the future and how they were going to get there, which is a different approach than being able to use readily available existing data sets. So that was the first step. Then we had to step through the economic analysis and then work closely with all of the project team in developing an action plan. So whilst it was important to identify the value and the capability of the sector now, I think my view has always been that the next part was, well, what are we going to do about it over the next 10 years and who's going to be responsible for what, was most important. And to be really clear in the message that we can't just let it continue to organically grow. It will not grow as fast as it would grow is if everyone supported the industry both in terms of policy and investment.
And Chris, from your perspective, what do you think it's going to take to continue that growth, the phenomenal growth of the industry? And where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think what we've been really lucky to have is the dedication of state governments through state development, through economic development Queensland, through innovation and through science, so all the departments of government who have been working with local government and with the local stakeholders, including the Gold Coast University Hospital, private, and also the universities here on the Gold Coast, to keep the vision pure. The Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct is a large space of land. It could have very easily fallen into something that wasn't a health and knowledge precinct. That land could have been sold off for other things, but it hasn't. And what we're seeing today, as we do these podcasts, we're seeing cranes in the sky building buildings that are dedicated to health and knowledge. And so what that means is that we can offer prospective international companies, prospective domestic companies, or even new startups, that idea that, hey, the state and local government are behind this initiative. They've been behind it for about a decade now. And you can see that we've grown this over the last 2 decades to what it is today. So we anticipate that we're going to continue to have that support over the decade and over the next decade and beyond. So I think that for us is really valuable here on the Gold Coast, that we have a large Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct, that we have the support of the governments and others to keep that vision pure and to develop it as a biomedical hub here on the Gold Coast, and a national exemplar is what we want it to be.
Absolutely. So what are the strategic advantages? What does the Gold Coast possess that make it an ideal location for attracting those international biomedical companies or even national ones? What is it about the Gold Coast? Why should they come here?
I think the first thing to think about is from a scale perspective, Australia is a very attractive location for so if you're trying to attract global companies, Australia is very attractive because of the R&D tax incentive, and we've got a really great health system and great health institutions. When we come down to the state level, Queensland's got a really clear and well-supported policy setting around attracting and growing the biomedical industry in Queensland. And then we come down, and Brisbane continues to grow as well, and Gold Coast is part of that southeast Queensland ecosystem. So we come down to the Gold Coast. We've got three universities. We've got great health institutions. We've already got great health researchers located here on the Gold Coast. And as Chris has pointed out, we've got everyone sitting behind it. And so that's spread out. And then you come down to, and we've talked about, we've got the knowledge precinct sitting there at, if you had to say that it's nowhere near reached its potential, and there's decades of development opportunity to continue to go there. But I think one of the things, obviously, and I've pointed it out before, I think that the city, it's an exciting place to be. I think it's a really attractive place for people to come here in terms of lifestyle, and I don't think that can be discounted, but I don't think it should. So I think now there's the scale of the sector at all levels. So in terms of the health institutions, the research institutions, down to the SMEs and the local innovation organisations, through to those ancillary support agencies that might do legal, regulatory, accounting, helping out through the regulatory process, etc. So I think it's a really attractive place to come. I think the other thing that we've done is we've put really good people in positions of advocacy, both in the knowledge precinct and generally in the city. And I think that will continue to bring and attract people to the city.
I might just jump into and add a little bit more. We've established a credibility here on the Gold Coast now. We've got runs on the board. We've shown that we can invent good world-leading technologies here on the Gold Coast and take them and develop those into the clinic. Also, we've shown that we can attract multinational companies here. That validates the science that we do here. If a multinational company wants to plant itself here, then it's looking at the resources we have available, and also it looks at the science that we do. And if we've ticked those boxes and we've landed one top 10 already, multinational pharma, then I can only see more to follow that. So I think it's the fact that we really are building a momentum now. We've got runs on the board, and so I think the trajectory is up from here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys. We are going to be launching and delivering the Gold Coast Biomedical Industry Study, and it will be available this week with the launch of this podcast as well. So I urge everyone to go onto the RDA website where it will be available. We'll put the links in underneath. But any final words, guys? This is the industry is just remarkable. It is just phenomenal. It is just growing at an exponential speed. It's just unbelievable. And I guess for me, it's all around that employment as well. We've lightly touched on that employment and the skills and how you can study and live and work here in highly skilled jobs. And I think that's the other takeaway for the Gold Coast. The other one is also around that supply chain. We're not just talking about the medical, we're talking about everyone who supplies into the medical. It can be like your paper for your office. It's everything, isn't it? And how can we increase and how can we highlight the value of that on the Gold Coast, and how do we support the industries around that to buy locally and stay local for those supply chains?
Stella, my last takeaway was that when we benchmarked other strong biomedical cities around the globe that are 30 or 40 years in front of us, the main commonality between those was this continued investment by government in the sector, especially in terms of infrastructure, over a long time, was able to provide the platform for ongoing success. So that would be my key takeaway, that at this point in time, we just need to continue to invest heavily in the infrastructure that will support the sector.
And I think my key take home would be the report itself that's been done exemplifies a collaboration on the Gold Coast. We've had the City of Gold Coast that's invested in this to get it done, to be able to set a baseline for our industry. We have the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct come on board as well. We've got Queensland Government through State Development, and we have Regional Development Australia, Gold Coast, all supported by Dan and Better Cities Group. So, look, I think this report has been a fantastic thing for us to undertake here on the Gold Coast. Like I say, it sets a baseline for our industry, and we can now track the industry over the coming decade against the KPIs that have been set in this market report. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at this report.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Well, that's it. And we look forward to speaking with you at a later date on more information in your specific fields around the biomedical industry on the Gold Coast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Estella. See you, Chris.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening today. For a complete list of podcast episodes and transcripts, go to rdagoldcoast.org.au/podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter.